Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, very well. We've got Dr. Lukasz Olejnik here today. He's an independent cybersecurity, privacy and data protection researcher and consultant, Senior Visiting Research Fellow of the Department of War Studies at King's College London. He holds a computer science PhD at INRIA, which is the French Institute for Research in Digital Science and Technology. We've had some people from INRIA here before, and an LL.M from the University of Edinburgh. He worked at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and was Research Associate at University College London. Lukasz was also associated with Princeton's Center for Information Technology Policy and Oxford's Center for Technology and Global Affairs. He was also a member of the W3C Technical Architecture Group. In case it wasn't enough, our guest is a former cyberwarfare advisor at the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, where he worked on the humanitarian consequences of cyber operations. He is the author of scientific articles, larger pieces, analyses. He's been quoted by leading publishers, and he has written 2 books, the latest of which, Propaganda, was published last month in October this year, and I have it here with me. With Lukasz, we're going to talk about the concept of propaganda, to then move into misinformation in the context of the EU Digital Services Act, and I have expressed my concerns in some interviews before regarding how this could affect freedom of speech. I will mention controversial measures recently taken by the Spanish government, for example, against certain media. And we will also talk about Section 230 in the US for comparative law purposes. Eventually, we'll land on current external threats to a peaceful outcome in the upcoming US elections, coming up in 2 days. Quite a lot to chew, let's go for it, but not without warning you that you will hear a very annoying background noise during the first minute or so, and then it will disappear. And no, there was no AI tool that could clean it properly. So please bear with us. Lukasz, thanks for joining me.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me.
Really good to have you. Congrats on your new book, Propaganda.
Thanks. That was a lot of work, so yeah, I'm happy that it's finally out.
I can see it's a lot of work. Again, I've only read about 20% of it, but I'm impressed by how much structure you've given it. It's very digestible as a result.
That's probably my bias from my PhD years. So I like sectioning things. The more sections, the better. Some of them are really short, and I know that.
So I like the historical background you give to the notion of propaganda and how the infighting within the church, or rather the Protestant movement against the Catholic Church, the Pope, and so on. It's a good background. But how would you define propaganda yourself?
So I will define propaganda as informational influence to achieve an effect. And this is quite a very general definition, because it doesn't mention who is making this influence, who is the source, who is the recipient, what is the target, what is the goal. That is something that may be made more precise, but it on the most general and high-level view, that's informational influence to achieve an effect.
Very good, yes. Everyone heard the stories of Bernays in the past century getting women to smoke, for example, or the public to change their mind on key issues. And maybe even Hollywood is in itself a gigantic propaganda machine or worse. So, can we say that there is no absolute truth and that everything is subject to interpretation and therefore subject to influence?
I disagree. I disagree. You can have a factual and 100% truth, for example, in physics. You can have verifiable theorems, for example, testable with experiments.
That's very good. Let's go that way. So, let's say that Galileo, back in the day, whenever he started claiming that the planets were not spinning around the Earth, but rather all of the planets, including the Earth, were spinning around the Sun, that he was spreading misinformation, or according to the church, back then that was the case, on the basis of the knowledge that at that point was well accepted. Can we describe that as misinformation, for example?
Absolutely. Today, it will be misinformation, and not only from church's perspective, because that was an established view of the world, and also other people like experts, lay persons, they also consider it a different view on how things are. So that was quite a bit more complex than just a church criticizing.
So let's say that science is evolving, as it happens with vaccines. And today we are able to say that something is true because we have new methods of testing. And there may be something that we believe today that in the future may be proven wrong. So, what do we do with the element of bad faith? Do we require that as a precondition to misinformation?
Obviously, intention is very important, whether the goals are, for example, malignant or harmful. So propaganda it may be seen as informational influence, but it may really use various approaches. It can use misinformation, so for example, information that is factually incorrect, but it is being spread like that without intention to deceive. You may have disinformation where you have an intention to spread something that is verifiably untrue with malicious intent. And you can also have a state actor, for example, or even a commercial company that is using this information to spread such information, but then ordinary people like normal social media users, then when they spread it, they may spread it convinced that it's truth. So they are unwittingly spreading misinformation, but not intentional disinformation. And then you have a third prong, which is using information that is verifiably true to achieve an impact effect. So you can use you can classify it in three ways, depending on the goal, on the tools you use, and also on the circumstances. Perhaps there are also events accompanying.
Okay, very good. Putting that into practice then. So you mentioned Doppelganger, a Russia-based group in your recent newsletter. What is this about?
So it's according to recently released information, it's a Russian state-supported group that is manufacturing narratives and, let's say, informational takes that are supporting Kremlin point of view, and that they are also engaged in sowing divisions in Western societies, and they do this in various ways. For example, by setting up fake websites that portray themselves as media. They even copy the design of esteemed websites, such as, for example, The Guardian, and hence as the way Doppelganger. They are pretending to be real media, and some people may make a spelling mistake, or they are being referred there. For example, via clicking a link, then they see a design that is looking exactly like The Guardian, but they are seeing distorted messages. So that's an informational influence.
So, yeah, I'm really sad to see that these things actually work, because I know some people that have fallen for some of these things and then they spread them further with the best of intentions, going back to our previous question. So they sadly work. But then we go into more blurry scenarios, right? Things that are not so clear cut as misinformation, with that bad intention, bad faith, with an agenda behind them. And I want to enter that blurry space and look at what the Digital Services Act, the DSA, in the EU is asking us to do, or is really doing. Isn't there a risk that if an administration, a government, local government, national government, can label a piece of news as misinformation, even though we're talking about news media that are possibly shooting in every direction, maybe leaning towards one political party or the other, isn't that a risk to democracy and to free speech? We've got something that starts smelling like this in Spain, with the government recently labeling certain online media as pseudo media, as not real media. And it happens to be publishers that attack the government, that criticize the government. And I understand, I'm not fully familiar, but I understand they're going to be deprived of advertising resources from public institutions, or I guess, large entities in which the government has a controlling stake. I think that's a very slippery slope. But the DSA mentions the word misinformation 13 times. I've counted it. And then we've seen people within the European Commission breaking free and deciding what amounts to misinformation. And I'm thinking, of course, of Thierry Breton, who's no longer with us at the Commission. So he told Elon Musk that he would not be allowed to interview Donald Trump on X, or at least that should not be available in Europe, because it would amount to misinformation. So, fully understanding that Donald Trump cannot control himself and he will lie through every pore. But still, how do you see that kind of intervention from the European Commission?
Returning to your earlier arguments, indeed, there you may have a balanced and objective view on the issue, but in the end, DSA needs to be implemented by states.
Yeah.
And so it will be subjected to political processes.
Yes.
It will be pity if some governments would designate disinformation something with which they simply disagree about. I mean, that's not the point. DSA was supposed to be an objective law that will be under the interpretation of courts. And indeed, during the works, the implementation of the very tools about fighting misinformation and disinformation, this is a result of years of hyping disinformation as a really dangerous risk. So that was several years in the making, and that's how political processes in Brussels work. So now it's included, and indeed it will be the major European law that is may be used to regulate free speech or modulate it. So indeed, no one advertised DSA during the work on the file. No one advertised DSA as something that may be used as a tool of censorship, because blocking entire media or entire social media, yes, that would amount to censorship, and to a typical censorship even predating First World War, state censorship. So that's also how the, let's say, DSA trigger happy Thierry Breton voiced the capability. First, he did it 1 year ago in 2023 during the riots in New Caledonia, where he threatened to block Snapchat or TikTok because it was simply a means of exchanging information or perhaps of coordinating those oppressing riots. No information proving that was disclosed by the French state, to my understanding. I can understand that sometimes such mediums may be misused. They may be used to coordinate, let's say, riots. That may happen. But threatening the blocking of entire platforms under some not really strong pretexts, that's probably crossing a few lines. And this really happened also regarding TikTok recently. So that is quite problematic because I think that policymakers should be wary and very careful from issuing such threats officially on paper as was done by this commissioner. And we need to remember that the power to block access to such a medium lies with the actual state. So it will be the Spanish state, French state, German state, or Polish state. They will have the powers to do this. And it works as follows. They may issue such a blocking order, and it will work for 4 weeks. And then court may inspect the rationale and decide whether it's possible to extend. So yes, it's all written in this file, although the parameters of enforcing DSA, they are completely undefined as of now.
So yeah, it makes sense that this happens at national level. Certain things will be illegal, for example, in Germany, like Nazi content, and may not be illegal in France. Plus, even consumer protection laws are very different, even at regional level, for example, in Spain. So the closer you get to the consumer, the closer you get to those sensitivities. But it is also more dangerous because as you get closer, then the censorship of media has more political impact. And that's my worry. And so now we're opening that debate both in the US and, well, in Europe it's already been reopened thanks to the DSA. But in the US, there's talk of canceling Section 230 or reverting those precepts. In essence, the same thing that we did in Europe back in 2000. So if you have a platform and people are publishing harmful content on your platform, that you're not liable for it because it's very hard to monitor. But if you do decide to monitor it, after that CompuServe case in the US, for example, then you will not be liable for the moderation effort that you undertake.
Unless this works, you are not liable unless you take any action about the content, you modify it somehow. But
yes,
in Europe, it's quite similar, but DSA quite puts a dent in that. I mean, changes this a bit in ways that the platforms are not liable, but once they receive a notification of something potentially infringing, let's say DSA, they have an obligation to take action.
Yes, and we have this notion of a trusted flagger in the DSA. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, that will be likely delegated to some NGOs, which would be more or less fact checkers, and I am not sure how that could work in practice. I would be very cautious because someone still needs to fund those NGOs, and you know how it is. If they have any political inclination, they may be more inclined to fact check certain sites more than other sites. Who knows?
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to go, and I wanted to hear your opinion. So we can establish that whenever something is purely scientific, then okay, we know what's true and what's not. As we depart from that and we get into the opinions of others, or into what we think others are thinking, or what we think is behind the politician's decision, in the sense of what's her or his plan, then we enter very muddy waters. And as I had your book with me in the past few days, I was also reading an article in the New Yorker about this guy called Lehane, who used to work for the Clintons and came up with very effective concepts like right-wing conspiracy, which I guess at the day wasn't such. And he even then moved into the private sector and went on to increase the limits that people could, or the money that people could recover after a medical malpractice. Then through very effective public campaigns with very questionable ads, eventually he moved on to do lobby for Silicon Valley, and he's very good at projecting the right words and having an impact on the political agenda through propaganda. So if we're going to intervene on misinformation, on the one hand, we could be hampering free speech. On the other hand, the manipulation of words is going to keep on happening. And now when we open the debate, for example, again, in the US, about Section 230, both sides of the aisle have different perspectives. Democrats tend to be asking for more moderation, right? For example, on Meta, social media platforms. Whereas Republicans seem to be asking for less moderation because they feel it's hurting them and they want more free speech, or some do. Where do you stand in that debate? How do we find a balance?
Well, my understanding is that once states designate digital coordinators, then they will have a working group and they will try to establish some standards, which will be standards of operation and how to enforce DSA. Those will be soft regulations. They will claim that it is based on DSA, perhaps other laws. In the end, it would, of course, be subject to court oversight, including European Court of Justice, the High European Court. But returning to your mentioning how about law-based, so yeah, we need to distinguish that, and we need to make sure that today we have various roles and various ways to describe such activities. We can say that it's lobbying, it may be PR, it may be communication expert, it may be strategic communication expertise. So it may be a number of roles about designing narratives and including political commercials. So 100 years ago, the name would be propagandist, but today we have a more versatile description, and some of it is simply legalized because it, for example, is transparent. We know who finances it. We also can clearly distinguish when, let's say, a commercial ad for washing powder or Coke, lime soda, is legal to advertise, even using persuasive techniques. So it's not that when someone tries to persuade or influence informationally the audience, it's not like it's always harmful. So there needs to be a balance. And in Europe, for example, it's clear that there are court verdicts, European Court of Human Rights verdict, which says that when it comes, for example, in political campaigning, there is a really broad permission to for political influence, because otherwise there would be a risk to society and democratic order. So someone could always claim that something should not be welcome in public debate, and then it could distort democratic elections and things of the kind.
Look, we're a few days away from the election here in the US.
This is also why Western societies may be a bit prone to external influencing, because they, for example, external actors might exploit such permissive stances to make to inject harmful narratives or inject harmful influencers, like, for example, the recently exchanged Pavel Rubtsov, which was there's an understanding that he may have been a Russian military intelligence operative, but he is also a famous and recognized Spanish journalist under the name Pablo González, and some people in Spain until this date doubt that he was actually a Russian intelligence operative, even after they saw him at the Moscow airport, welcomed by President Putin.
Oh, that's impressive. So, a last question for you. Back to the elections. Something that I understand that I heard or read, but who knows, of course, right, is orchestrated by Russia and others, is that if Trump loses, it will be because the election has been stolen. That campaign seems to be effective. It seems to be working from where I stand. The idea that millions of illegals are being allowed in to vote without an ID to steal the election, so that if Trump doesn't win, as he should, the election will have been rigged. If you want the US to face a civil war, I cannot think of anything more effective. How do you see the US can survive something like this?
Indeed, in the book, I am also considering the possibilities of making a coup d'etat. I mean, trying to hijack power in a state, starting from informational resources. So that's not sufficient, because you still need some strength and power. And I mean by that quasi-state or parts of state structure to actually hijack power. And in particular, the US is quite resilient to that, because you have, I think, it's a federation, basically. So you have a number of states. All of them have their own law enforcement, so armed units. There are also dozens of federal agencies. So it's not that easy to hijack power in such a... So you can't take over power in a state only with propaganda. You can't.
Thank you. That's a relief. Lukasz, thank you very much. I want to believe that. That's hopeful. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's all for today. Please follow the Masters of Privacy channel on LinkedIn if you want to find some interview transcripts, cheat sheets, and other useful resources and surprises every now and then. On top of that, episode notes and other feeds are available on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.